He was a stylish New York politician who completely shocked his critics by actually doing one right thing for once when he became president. Nicknamed the Gentleman Boss because of his impeccable mustache and being played by Ron Swanson in Death by Lightning, he assumed the presidency after the tragic passing of James Garfield, despite never being elected to any previous executive office. He hired famous designer Louis Comfort Tiffany to completely redecorate the White House. He also kept his fatal kidney disease a total secret during his entire presidency. But shocking his corrupt former allies, he signed the Pendleton Civil Service Act to base government jobs on merit rather than political favor. And he authorized the rebuilding of the modern U.S. Navy. He rose above the corrupt political roots to become a surprisingly effective and reform-minded president. Just don't ask him about his opinion on China. Who was the only president in American history to serve 2 non-consecutive terms? Oh, my script might be a little bit outdated. Who was the first American president in American history to serve non-consecutive terms? Nicknamed his obstinacy due to his rigid inflexibility, he was the first Democrat elected since James Buchanan, one of the largest political droughts for a party in American history. He was known for being relentlessly hardworking as the governor of New York. He's the only president to be married in the White House itself, and he was also completely unapologetic about his heavy use of the presidential veto, vetoing hundreds of bills during his term, setting a record. During his first term, he signed the Interstate Commerce Act to regulate the powerful railroad monopolies and fiercely fought to lower protective tariffs. He restored power to the executive branch through his massive use of vetoes and set the stage for modern government economic regulation. And if you buy my book, you'll get to learn about one of his controversies, which was really, really, really bad. He was the grandson of former President William Henry Harrison, but he was so terrified of the White House light switches that he refused to touch them. Nicknamed the Human Iceberg for his stiff and formal personality, Benjamin Harrison was a Civil War veteran and an Indiana politician who lost the popular vote but won the Electoral College. He was the very first president to have electricity installed in the White House, but because the technology was so new and he and his wife were terrified of getting electrocuted, they often slept with the lights on until the staff turned them off. The reason he was called the Human Iceberg is because he quite simply sucked at small talk and shook hands with gloves on. He signed the McKinley Tariff and the landmark Sherman Antitrust Act to break up massive business monopolies. He also spent Cleveland's budget surplus and got the congressional budget to $1 billion, hence the name Billion Dollar Congress. He significantly expanded federal power to regulate massive corporations and protect domestic American industries. How did a sitting United States president manage to have a secret cancer surgery on a private yacht? We already met Grover the Good, but he made history in 1892 by becoming the only Democrat president to ever win a second non-consecutive term after losing his first re-election bid. The populists partly helped him by splitting the Republican vote in states out west, thus dooming Benjamin Harrison's chances. During his second term, doctors discovered a cancerous tumor in his jaw, so Grover Cleveland snuck onto a friend's yacht under the cover of night and had a team of surgeons secretly remove it. Cleveland also once had jokingly told a young FDR he wished FDR would never become president. That's very ironic. His second term was immediately struck by the Panic of 1893, a devastating economic depression. He controversially used federal troops to crush the massive Pullman Railroad strike, and his staunch, uncompromising response to the economic crisis ultimately fractured his own political party, leading to a major political realignment and set the stage for the working class to collude with businessmen to beat the agrarian populists. In the election of 1896, which, by the way, is the only reason I got a 5 on my A-Push AP test. I used it as outside evidence for the DBQ. He was the last president to serve in the Civil War, and he officially turned America into a global empire. Nicknamed the Idol of Ohio, William McKinley was a fiercely popular Republican who ran his successful front porch campaign without actually traveling the country. He repeatedly triumphed over the populist Democrat candidate known as William Jennings Bryan, on multiple occasions, and tragically he was killed at the Pan American Exposition in New York. And after 3 similar incidences like this happening in American history, the Secret Service finally decided it was a good idea to probably protect the president. He famously led the United States through the Spanish-American War, which resulted in a rapid victory in the acquisition of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, even though there was a lot of confusion about the U.S.'s new global role on the world stage, cue George Washington. He loved tariffs and is especially relevant today, and officially established the United States as a formidable global imperial power on the world stage. He was blind in one eye from a White House boxing match and survived being struck by a bullet before giving a 90-minute speech. Come on, you already know his name. At just 42 years old, Teddy Roosevelt became the youngest president in history after McKinley's passing. He was a legendary outdoorsman and a hero of the Rough Riders cavalry that won notoriety fighting the Spanish in Cuba. The teddy bear is literally named after him because he famously refused to harm a defenseless bear on a hunting trip. He also became the first American to win the Nobel Peace Prize for helping negotiating a peace treaty between Russia and Japan. I was really mad when Woodrow Wilson refused to allow him to fight in World War I. He did a lot of stuff. He also hated his presidential portrait. He broke up massive corporate monopolies, passed the Pure Food and Drug Act, initiated the building of the Panama Canal, and drastically expanded the power of the modern presidency through the bully pulpit concept and preserved millions of acres of American national parks. What Supreme Court justice also was President of the United States? Or should I say, what U.S. President was also Chief Justice of the Supreme Court? Either way, the answer is William Howard Taft, who was handpicked by Theodore Roosevelt to be a brilliant legal mind who preferred the courtroom over the fierce battles of politics. Once being appointed to the Supreme Court by Warren G. Harding, he remarked how he ever forgot that he even was president. Weighing over 300 pounds, he was America's largest president. While the myth says he got stuck into a White House bathtub, he actually just had a massive custom-built tub installed into the White House, so it was just a rumor. But he did break up bathtub monopolies, so, you can guess who probably spreaded the rumor at the time, even though there's no evidence, just my speculation. He also started the tradition of a president throwing out the first pitch in baseball. He actually broke up more corporate trusts than Teddy Roosevelt and championed dollar diplomacy to encourage American investment in Latin America. He prioritized legal and economic expansion abroad, though his conservative shift compared to Theodore Roosevelt ultimately split the Republican Party and led to him getting elected. Woodrow Wilson, the president who in theory can be loved by all, but in practice, is disliked by all. Sort of like the futility of many Wilson's theories, he had many controversies. Nicknamed the schoolmaster in politics, Woodrow Wilson was a former president of Princeton University. To this day, he remains the only U.S. president to hold a PhD. During his second term, he suffered a severe stroke that left him partially paralyzed, so his wife, Edith Wilson, strictly controlled access to him and effectively made executive decisions in secret for months. Hint, this is why we have the 25th Amendment now. He established the Federal Reserve, signed the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote, and reluctantly led the nation into World War I and started the League of Nations. He also curtailed civil liberties, resegregated the government, and bought the U.S. Virgin Islands. He completely restructured the modern American financial system and fundamentally reshaped global diplomacy through the proposal of his League of Nations. Which president got elected because he was attractive? That's not an exaggeration. He promised a return to normalcy, but his presidency became one of the most corrupt and scandal-ridden in American history. Wobbly Warren G. Harding was an incredibly popular newspaper publisher and senator from Ohio who won the 1920 election by a massive landslide. This was also the first election where women could vote in all 50 states. Even though it was the middle of Prohibition, he secretly hosted massive alcohol-fueled poker games in the White House twice a week. He suddenly passed away from a heart attack midway through his term in San Francisco. He also once said, "I am not fit for this office and never should have been here." At least he was self-aware. He successfully signed the Budget and Accounting Act. However, his administration was ruined by the Teapot Dome scandal, where his cabinet members were caught taking massive bribes for oil reserves. Herbert Hoover warned Harding but Harding refused to listen. Though he established the country's first formal budgeting system, his legacy is permanently overshadowed by the massive corruption of his friends. He also killed the League of Nations, which hurt my feelings. Calvin Coolidge was a president who was basically the anti-Wilson and could be liked by all, but is only really remembered because of lackadaisian Ronald Reagan. He was sworn into the presidency by his own father using only light of a kerosene lamp. Assuming office after Harding's sudden passing, Calvin Coolidge was a fiercely conservative former governor of Massachusetts who believed the government should stay out of business. Nicknamed Silent Cal, he was famous for barely speaking. A dinner guest once told him she made a bet that she could get him to say more than 2 words. He simply replied, "You lose." He was fiercely pro-business, slashing taxes and significantly reducing the national debt during the economic boom of the Roaring Twenties. He consistently vetoed farmer relief bills because he didn't like fixed federal prices. His hands-off economic policy fueled massive, unprecedented prosperity, though critics argue his lack of regulation set the stage for the Great Depression.